Now let's add more fields to the to-do form. Create item node with name description. Specify description component. Magento underscore UI, JS, /form, and element. Then we will specify text area. We can find text area component under Magento UI module. Expand module UI, view, base, web, JS, form, and then element. And we can find text area component here. In form, we will make use of following components. Number 1, abstract. Number 2, text area. And number 3, date. Go back to to-do layout file. Now specify text area component. Next, we will create field config node. Then inside, create custom scope node and specify the scope. Specify the template, UI, form, field. Next, create data scope node. And specify a custom scope todo.description. Then we create label node and specify field label. We can optionally specify a sort order. Create placeholder node and specify the placeholder text. Now add validations. Create required entry node and let's make this field optional. Create max text length node and specify length 200. Next, create start date field by creating a node with the name start_date. Specify XSI type array. Create component node and specify date component. Magento underscore UI, JS, form, element, and then specify date component. Next, create config node. Specify form field template. Next, specify custom scope of the field element. Now create data scope node. And specify its value, todo.start_date. Next, specify the field label. Specify the field placeholder. And finally add validations. Create date validator node. Now we will copy this node and then paste it. Rename the node to end_date. Then modify the data scope value accordingly. Change the label text. Flush the cache and clear the static or generated content. Open to-dos page. Click edit button from any of the item. From model, we see all fields rendered as expected. And date components are also displaying the calendar. Now open abstract component. Now we will replace the object array with a function, so other components should be able to modify buttons according to their needs. So first go ahead and create function get popup buttons. It should accept object array parameter. For now, we will return this parameter as is inside abstract component. Now cut the whole object array and pass into newly created function as parameter. Now open to-do component. And let's override get popup buttons function. We will simply push our custom button object item, specify text, save, and class actions and primary. Then finally specify the function for click action. Let's create a custom function, save to do form. We will call this function on save action. Apply bindings to save to do form function. Finally, return the modified parameter. Let's see what more we can do with the editTodo function. Now open to do template file. Here we can see editTodo function is being called from an element under a loop. So when function is called, element passes the item information as parameter. So let's go ahead and add this parameter to editTodo function. Let's try printing the parameter output. Flush the cache and remove static or generated content now. Reload the page. Let's check using element inspector. Switch to console tab. Let's clear the log. Now click edit button from first item. We see exact item information is printed. Close the model and let's check another item. Let's see the output of second item. The output is displayed as expected. Remove the log. Next, we will use data source to display the requested item text on input fields. For this purpose, we will need to create and specify a data provider first. So go ahead and specify the data provider. We will create a new node next to the game-todo-scope node. Let's name this node to todo provider. Provide XSI type array. Now specify todo provider component. And it's gonna be a UI component. Provider is simply a UI component which will be used to provide source of data to needed components. Now under todo node, create a new config node. So next we are going to create a component dependency node. This can contain multiple dependencies. For now, we are specifying single dependency, and in value, we will specify the provider name, that's todo provider. Now open todo component. In editTodo function, set the data source for todo scope and assign item to it. When we specify the data source for a particular data scope, we actually set the data for its related fields. Here the important thing is todo as a data scope. And if we remember, we earlier talked about setting data scope for each field. This data scope is used to retrieve the value of particular field when specified. To use data source, we have to specify the provider for every field. So go ahead and create provider node for title and specify todo provider as its value. And specify the provider for other fields as well. Flush the cache and clear the static or generated content. Reload the todos page. Now, if we click the edit button from any of the item, we see the text is being displayed correctly except the date fields. The issue could be due to setting text after validations. So let's go ahead and do a workaround for it. Open todo component. We will use jQuery to properly set the values in date input fields. First, let's go with start date input field. Inside value, create date object, and inside the date constructor, specify the start date. Then convert the object to locally date string. Then add comma and specify the date formatting. To properly process changes to this UI field, we need to trigger the change event. Now add jQuery dependency. Follow similar process for end date. Copy and paste the start date. In selectors, change the start date to end date. Then change item.start date to item.end date. Flush the cache and clear the static or generated content. Reload the to-dos page. Click the edit button from any of the item. Now we see both the dates are set correctly. And if we click the field, calendar will be marked, but it does not has correct year selected. So let's fix this in all model data. Begin adding years. Specify years for every start and end dates. Reload the to-dos page. Now, if we click the edit button, we see the dates are now displaying correctly and we see the correct year. Calendar also displays the correct mark date and year. If we look closely, we need to set the limit for end date so that it should have disabled dates which appear before selected start date. Go back to to-do layout file. To perform customization for end date field, we will have to create a custom component for it. So replace Magento UI with our module name. Now go ahead and create date component. Open layout file and copy Magento date component. In dependency, specify Magento date component. Extend and return the component. Create defaults object. Add knockout dependency. Now create a property with name dependent value and make it observable. Let's set its default value empty string. In next steps, we will have more clarity about using this variable. Now open layout file. We are going to use linking observable properties here. Imports property and listens property. First of all, we will use imports linking property. The imports property is used for tracking changes for an external entity property. Imports value is an object composed of the following: key and value. Key is the name of internal property or method that receives the value. Value is the name of property or method that is tracked for changes. So we will use imports for end date field and will link value property of start date field. Begin adding imports node. Specify access type array. Now create item node with variable name dependent value. The access type will be string. We can get the value of start date field using scope path. So it will be km-to-do scope to do field set and then start date. Now specify the imports value and assign to dependent value variable of end date field. Km-to-do scope to do field set start date and then specify the value of the column. Now open the date component. Now we will use listens linking property in date component. The listens property is used to track the changes of a component's property. Listens value is an object composed of the followings: number 1 key and number 2 value. Key is the name of observable property or method which is tracked for changes. Value is the name of an internal method or property which listens to the changes. In our case, we will track dependent value property using listen property. So go ahead and specify the listen property in the default object. And inside it, specify dependent value as key and on dependent update method as value. Now we need to create on dependent update method. It accepts value as parameter. Next, add dependencies jQuery and calendar. First, check if value is set and is not undefined. Select element using ID. Then apply date picker widget to it. Pass min date as option in parameter. In min value, specify the date object and pass value variable to the date object, as we are referring to the current component. So fix UID by calling the property this.uid. Click edit button from any of the item. Now if we click the end date field, we see the date limit is being applied as expected. And if we try changing the start date, the end date limit gets updated along with it.